Hello, my name is Ray Lopez, and I am your City Council representative for District 6. This is Lopez Live, Community Empowerment. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our program, Lopez Live. Today I'm very excited to have as my guest John Dugan, Director of the city's Planning and Community Development Department, and Mario Jorge, the San Antonio District Engineer for the Texas Department of Transportation. On the show, will discuss the city's proposed annexation plan and how the city, county, and state are responding to the growing transportation needs, especially here in District 6. Now I'd like to welcome to the show my first guest, John Dugan. John, welcome.
Good morning, Councilman. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad to have you here. I know that you and I have had a lot of discussion around what's happening, not only in our district, because there's certainly a lot of growth in that district, but what's happening also throughout our entire community. As we've evolved into what our plan is for annexation, for managing growth, it's been really critical to have your input, to have your staff and your development folks kind of figure out where we're headed next. Talk to us a little bit about why we're even considering annexation and perhaps some of the areas that are going to be annexed.
Sure. Well, as you know, the city is growing fast. This is one of the fastest growing big cities in the country, maybe 25, 30,000 people a year. We have to anticipate that growth, get in front of it. We're doing a big comprehensive plan. We're doing a big transportation plan. We're trying to anticipate where do you put 1 million people moving here, and how do you control the city's destiny. We don't want to be surrounded by communities like in Dallas or around Fort Worth and other cities, St. Louis, where you can't grow and our future is determined by someone else.
Sure.
So we're looking at annexing some areas right now in the first phase of a multi-phase annexation program on the south side related to the City South Management Authority.
Well, and I guess a lot of the questions around that is, so why would we do that? And if so, is it going to generate a significant amount of tax? How is the tax burden going to be handled by those individuals? So talk a little bit about how that happens. I know we talk about limited annexation and then that whole process. If you can allude a little bit to that, that would be helpful.
On the south side, first of all, the Management Authority was effective a study done of that area last year to determine whether it should continue or not. And the decision by City Council was no, it should be dissolved, but under the condition that the key opportunity sites for economic growth be annexed. So the study that we're doing now, which involves 4 areas, about 35 square miles on the south side, south of 410, between 37, 35, we're evaluating that in terms of limited purpose annexation. That kind of annexation looks out 36 months, and within that 36-month time frame, we evaluate in much more detail the level of service that would be needed to bring the citizens in that area up to par with the rest of the city in terms of service. And in that time frame, only the city's public safety and development controls are extended. There's no taxation, there's no sales or property tax. But
during that period,
but we can do this evaluation and we can manage the use of land in that interim period.
Well, I think that's important for the public to know, as well as what city codes apply during this period and things of that nature. If you can allude to that a little bit.
Right,
as well.
The zoning ordinance, the building permits, the building code, and some public health and safety codes would be still applicable, newly applicable in that area. Plus, we would be rezoning some of that property that's been in the county, never had zoning, so that it reflects the current land use and the plans that owners have for their property.
So there will be rezoning issues, and the process that the rest of the city follows will be applied to those individuals during this
That's
period.
right. One of the issues that the development evaluation looked at was the fact that the Management Authority had a lot of different process, a lot of red tape for people to develop their property. All that will be sort of evened out and canceled and made par with the rest of the city. So this is one of the interests there, was to develop that property in a way that was consistent with the rest of the city's zoning and planning process.
Well, there's a lot of areas in the city that are, if you were to look at a map of the city, you'd say, well, the growth is bulging in certain areas. And we understand why in many of those areas. To the south, and City South has an obvious interest, a lot of the Eagle Ford activity, a lot of the development. Talk a little bit about, for example, the bulge that's happening outside of District 6 or to the northwest part of the San Antonio, and how do you see that evolving?
Right, there's a lot of growth. West side now is the fastest growing section of the city. West, northwest, that's the big direction of growth. We'll be coming back in the springtime with some proposals for annexation there, after a big detailed evaluation. We'll be looking at some major changes eventually for the thoroughfare plan out there for major roads. and areas that might or might not be annexed in the future. There's also some proposals out there for PIDs, public improvement districts, for large residential developments that we'll be looking at.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the discussion, at least a lot of the focus that I've seen, is how do we deliver the services to those individuals and still keep it within a reasonable expense. Because I can tell you, John, and I think I've said this to you before, a lot of people will come and knock on our door there at the district office and not necessarily demanding to get annexed. I don't think anybody's looking to pay city taxes and get involved, but they do ask for services, for a higher level of service, for police and fire, emergency services. How does that, not necessarily for District 6, but in general, how does that get affected when we annex a section, and how soon after that are we required and are we able to deliver those services? Because that's really what people want, better services.
Right. Well, in that limited purpose time, that 36 months between the time the council adopts an ordinance and the 36 months is over, the city has to do a very detailed assessment of what the level and needs for services would be, whether it be fire and police, parks, recreation, libraries, etc. Improvements to the infrastructure for roads and bridges. All those things are assessed, and then the area that to be annexed, finally, we then have to put together a very detailed capital improvement program for that and a finance plan for that, so that when it comes into the city, the law says now that that area has to be treated the same as equally situated areas already in the city. So if it's a suburban area, it has to be planned for a suburban level of service. If it's an more urban area, for an urban level. For a rural area, for a more rural level of service. But it has to be commensurate with what's in the city now. And so that's what happens during that 36 months. We come up on 36 months to council, we'll say, okay, here's the area that we're recommending for annexation for final purposes forever, and here's the service plan that will be provided over the next few years for new infrastructure improvements, through bond issues, through CIP, IMP, all those different programs to provide for services.
Well, you mentioned the thoroughfare plan a second ago, and later on in the show I'm going to have someone from TxDOT talking about the transportation needs, and I think all of that really comes together. The transportation needs, the growth needs, annexation, a plan for annexation, how we go about doing all that. And quite honestly, these things typically are planning issues that are perhaps a decade out before we really start seeing the true effects of it. And I think what people are unsure of is what happens in the meantime. You know, how am I going to be brought into the city if I am? What is that impact going to be to me personally? And oftentimes it has to do with taxes and the cost of doing that. One of the questions that get asked, certainly from the folks that are currently outside the city, are, so what happens to my ag exemption, for example? Or I've got a farm that over the course of my family's existence here in San Antonio was handed down from generation to generation, and I'm sitting here. How does all that work, the exemptions, the ag exemptions, and things of that nature? If you'll touch on that, because I think that's important.
Yes, state annexation law requires that we offer ag-exempt properties that right now have an agricultural exemption from the county assessor, appraiser, that they can opt out for a period of years. For our proposal, it's 10 years. If they sign a development agreement, we agree that we will not annex them for 10 years. They agree to be annexed in 10 years, but they could extend it if we mutually agree at that time in 10 years from now. During that 10 years, they can continue their agricultural operations and be taxed at an ag level, but they can't build anything new except agriculture-related uses. They might add to their home if they have a home there. They can't subdivide, they can't do residential development, and if they do, that's tacit agreement to be annexed.
So it's basically, if you truly are in an ag environment
and stay that way,
you can continue to do that. Because I do believe that, I think under the breath, a lot of people say, well, there are people taking advantage of that. They claim ag exemption when indeed they're not doing that. They put a horse and a goat and a donkey and get the exemption. While I realize that there probably are scenarios like that, people that are truly in an ag environment or that have a farm are going to be protected simply by continuing to do what you've been doing before, and you continue to get the exemptions. Is that
that's right? But if they do develop or want to develop or try to subdivide, then automatically they're saying, well, we give that up and we'll annex it.
Right. Well, what is the process for doing that? Is that something that would come to the city for, development services?
We send right now, in this annexation process underway, we've sent out 250 different letters and different agreements for people to sign, property owners. We've received back in this round about 150 so far of the 250. They have another couple weeks. And that covers thousands of acres of the properties that we're looking at annexing. So those areas won't be annexed at the first phase here. They may be annexed after 10 years. We'll put them in the phase plan. But they will be able to continue with their agricultural activities as long as they don't try to subdivide and develop.
Sure. And once we make that determination, is there an appeals process? What if someone says, hey, wait a minute, you didn't take everything into consideration. I want a second opinion. However,
yeah, they can always come back
whatever position they
over
take.
the next many months and say, here's a revised agreement. We're proposing to change this and that, and we'll consider it.
Good. Well, I do believe that the due process, I think everybody's expecting to have happen. I know that we certainly want that to be the process. So in general, I think what can people expect in particularly the northwest part of the city that haven't been annexed yet as far as a timeline? I mean, you mentioned 10 years. What would you see big picture?
Well, big
from
picture,
that perspective?
next spring we'll be coming back to council with some recommendations looking at the entire ETJ, the entire area around the city, 800 square miles in Bexar County and some outside of Bexar County, to see what makes sense to be in the city based on resource conservation, strategy in terms of relationship with other cities, development opportunity sites because of key growth nodes, and all those things that are important in the new policy the council adopted in February. And we'll look at that and say these properties make sense, these don't, and this makes sense over 3 years, next 3 years for limited, then later on 6 years, 9 years, and we'll present that all to council, and after a good discussion with you all, we'll adopt a plan.
So there's generally a checklist that says, here are the parameters around how we make that decision. Is that available to the public? How would someone,
those
if they want to do
annexation
that kind of
policies,
research?
yeah, that's on our website right now in the Planning Department, Planning and Community Development. You go
And
there.
that website is?
Planning and Community Development, City of San Antonio.
Okay, cityofsanantonio.gov,
Right.
City and Planning Development.
Right.
Well, great. Well, I know that there's a lot of information, and sometimes people can get really caught up in all of the rules and regulations. What it boils down to is how do we make our community better for all of us, recognizing that there's a lot of issues relative to growth that affect us, not only whether it's city, county, or even outside the county. We are all affected by what's going on in our community. Planning is a critical component of that, typically a very long, drawn-out process. So thank you for the work that you've done. Oftentimes it's not the most exciting, but it definitely is something that affects us very, very significantly. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, and we certainly have the public interest in mind, and we'll have a lot of public discussion about all this.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for being here, John. I look forward to continuing to
right.
work with you.
Thank you.
Well, we'll toss it back to the break, and stay with us, and we'll be right back after this short break to talk to Mario Jorge from the Texas Department of Transportation.
Did you know that donation containers are allowed for nonprofit organizations? However, they must be registered and permitted through the city's Development Services Department. The city regulates the size, location, and maintenance of donation containers. This is to be sure that donation container operators and property owners where containers may be located, as well as citizens who use the donation containers to recycle unwanted items, are responsible in their upkeep as well as proper uses. It's important for citizens who use the donation containers throughout the city to know that if items won't fit inside the containers, that they cannot just be left on the property. Items that do not fit in the containers must be discarded or donated by other means than through the use of donation containers. Donation containers with no permit or without visible identification decals are likely in violation of the city ordinance and should be reported to 311, the city's customer service line. Partnering with our community to build and maintain a safer San Antonio.
Mi amigo venía de vacaciones. Su camioneta se salió del camino y se volcó. Mi amigo fue aventado dentro de la cabina de la camioneta y sufrió heridas muy graves. Está en silla de ruedas, todo a causa de no tener abrochado el cinturón. Por eso damos tickets. Abrochar el cinturón es algo que salva vidas. Puede evitar heridas graves, como mi amigo.
So, same time next week?
Well, of course. Put away a few bucks, feel like $1,000,000. For free tips to help you save, go to Feed the Pig.
Welcome back to our program. I'm your District 6 Councilman Ray Lopez, and this is Lopez Live Community Empowerment. We're going to be talking to Mario Jorge, the San Antonio District Engineer for the Texas Department of Transportation, also known as TxDOT, about our transportation issues here in San Antonio and particularly in District 6. Mario, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I got to tell you that we just had a district engineer that was here before named Mario. Is that a trend that's going to continue, Mario after Mario after Mario?
No, I don't think there's too many Marios left in the department, so
Well,
hopefully I'll be one of the last ones here.
Well, there you go. Well, welcome. And I know we've had a chance now for the last few months to get engaged in a lot of the projects that are going on in the district. Many of those, of course, are new projects that we're trying to work with, try to identify, find funding for. And then a lot of them are projects that we've brought forward over the course of the last year or two here in the district that you basically inherited.
Right.
And we'll talk about some of those. We'll talk about some of the future stuff that's going on. And I think a lot of the concern within the district is we've got so much growth.
Absolutely.
And transportation is one of those incredibly important issues for quality of life. And I recall over the course of the last few years that we've had a lot of discussion with the community. Two of the big things that come out of the discussions, especially with our SA 2020 plan, was transportation and education. Well, of course, education, I think we're doing what we can to address that. We got the pre-K going. Transportation is a big one, and it's a big, I guess, a big dollar sign that goes with that. Yes. So let's talk a little bit about that. And let's start with, I think, what everybody's really interested in knowing what's going on, and that's the 151 and 1604 project. I know it kind of came to a halt there with some issues dealing with environmental issues. A little spider, I think, that popped up out of not nowhere, but out of the project. Tell us a little bit about that, where we were, where we are, and where we're going.
Sure, no, absolutely. Definitely, it was an issue that was not anticipated. So the project has now been changed in scope. We've looked at changing the design of the interchange itself. And so we're changing it to minimize the impact to any endangered species or even to avoid them altogether. Sure. And so what the interchange will look like now is 151 will go over 1604, and then we'll have a direct connector from 1604 that will feed into the inbound 151. We feel like that addresses the major mobility challenges there at that intersection without impacting negatively any endangered species. We are doing the environmental assessment right now at this stage. We anticipate being able to have a public meeting sometime in late spring, and then if everything goes according to our expectations, we'll anticipate having environmental clearance for that project in the fall of 2014. So looking forward to that. The project is part of a design build project that's already been given notice to proceed on 1604 from Bandera Road to Culebra. Right. So if everything goes well, the construction dollars are already in that project. So you'll see construction going on in that area over the next year or two.
Well, yeah, that 151 overpass, I guess, is the linchpin, as they say. We're also headed in both directions from that location. So if we're looking for maybe a late fall 14 kind of kickoff for that one, how about the other two segments to upstream and downstream, as they say?
Yeah, it's definitely, we have a lot of work planned on 1604, as you mentioned, Councilman. There's so much growth in that area. The traffic growth is tremendous. So what we're doing is the first project that we're going to be starting construction probably in this early spring is the section from Bandera to Culebra. And that's going to be a full expressway facility, 4 lanes, 2 lanes each direction with frontage roads and overpasses at the major intersections there between those limits. It'll work like the rest of 1604 to the north. So that project has already been awarded to a contractor. Williams Brothers is the contractor, and they're doing the design build. We anticipate some groundbreaking on that project, like I said, in March, April timeframe. The interchange at 151 is also part of that project, but that will come in at a later phase once we get the environmental clearance taken care of. And it's a total cost for that entire project. It's $127 million, again, which is already funded. So with bond proceeds from our Texas Commission. The other two projects which you referred to is the continuation of 1604 to the south. And we're doing two more projects. The next one is from Culebra to Potranco. Again, the same type of construction, 4-lane expressway facility, 2 lanes in each direction with the frontage roads and the overpasses at Weissman, and we already have one in Culebra and Potranco, but so it'll fit in real well. That project, we're working on the design and the environmental. The funding for that project will be part of the ATD local funds that through VIA, the county and the city are provided to TxDOT. And so that project, we anticipate starting construction sometime in about a year, about middle of 2015, I think early to middle of 2015 we'll start construction there. Then the final project is which will extend the expressway all the way to US 90. That project, we're working currently on a funding plan with the city, with the RMA, with the Bexar County, and VIA to come up with a funding plan where TxDOT can participate with that. So we haven't finalized that yet, but we are doing all the project development, the environmental schematics, and we'll have that project ready to go probably in about 1.5 to 2 years to start construction.
I think that the community is incredibly excited about that, and I know that there's going to be pain, right, from the day that we start to the day that we finish. But once it's finished, I think it's going to be a tremendous component to the overall quality of life in that part of the city, because it's a tremendous amount of growth. So generally speaking, we have 4 phases, starting from Bandera, working our way down to the bridge. That's phase 2, and 3 is, as I say, downstream from that. Then 4, and I think one of the things that I always get asked, certainly at meetings, is, so are those going to be tolled, or is that, we already paid for, and all that kind of dialogue. These are all non-tolled roads.
Correct. This will be, like I say again, it's very similar to the 1604 expressway that we have to the north of there. So it'll be 4 expressway main lanes, non-toll. There'll be a gap in the middle as future capacity is needed, and we'll talk about those.
And that gap is really a preparation for perhaps, if as needed, as the growth continues out there, perhaps to have managed lanes in the middle. At least we'll be prepared to do that, and that's a discussion that we can continue to have.
Correct.
Whether that becomes money from above, which typically doesn't come, or some other funding mechanism. But today, that center lane component really isn't constrained, or it hasn't been appropriated dollars. We'll deal with that in future years as it comes up. But typically, that's considered a managed lane project, which does mean toll. It means pay to drive. It means our emergency vehicles will be on it, and other folks that feel that they would like to go ahead and pay and avoid whatever potential traffic there may be on the free side. So we'll get more into that perhaps in another.
Absolutely, there'll be some projects that will have that component. These two here will not. Will be strictly a regular standard expressway main lanes.
Got it. Okay. Well, thank you very much for kind of clarifying that. I don't know that everybody kind of understands that there's been an awful lot of talk about toll, non-toll, but these are definitely non-toll lanes. About $160 million that are already funded. And that you're working through, and we're excited about making sure that those things get underway.
Yeah, it's part of a big partnership that I think we're trying to build here in San Antonio with the city, with the county, with TxDOT and VIA, and I think we're off to a good start. And I think these projects on 1604 and others that we'll develop here in the region, I think are going to be part of that.
Couldn't agree with you more. Now let's stay on that kind of topic a little bit. Now let me take you down 151, right? Take you down to 151 where it intersects with 410.
Right.
Yeah. I think some people, depending on which direction you're going, would say that's a pretty significant bottleneck. Trying to get from 410 onto 1604, one direction or the other. What are some of those plans and funding possibilities and that kind of stuff for that?
Yeah, that's one of the interchanges, one of our priority interchanges that we're looking at. Unfortunately, we don't have the funding in place for that project. However, we are doing some of the advanced engineering work that's needed, some of the preliminary traffic studies, identifying some of the geometrics that will be needed. And our goal is to have an interchange like that available and ready to go should funding become available. We may have to do it in phases, and I know the probably primary phases will be 151 inbound, heading on 410 east, and then if you're heading on 410 west, to go 151 outbound. Those two directions seem to be the most heavily traveled. So we'll focus on those, but we will have an interchange plan there in place, ready to go should funding become available.
Well, I'm looking forward to helping you tackle that as we work through these issues on MPO. I know our segment is kind of running short on time, but I did want to get one last question in there for you. As we move into the winter season, right, there's going to be a lot of issues on the road relative to safety.
Right.
There will be days when there's going to be freezing, there's going to be
right,
bad weather. What is TxDOT doing to prepare the community to make sure that they engage the roads in this most safe way as possible?
Yeah, absolutely, Councilman. Thanks for the question. First of all, the month of December is one that truly concerns us greatly. Just as an example, last December here in San Antonio, we had over 228 alcohol-related crashes. We had about 80 people that were seriously injured and 8 fatalities just in the month of December. And so that's just not even including any weather conditions. That's strictly alcohol related. So this is a difficult month for us here, and we want to do everything we can to advise our community to make good decisions when it comes to driving. If there's inclement weather, if you don't have to go anywhere, stay at home. That's the best way. If you do have to travel, increase the following distance from the vehicles in front of you. Slow down. Those are the main keys. But also with the holiday season coming up, we urge everyone to what we call take a holiday pass, which is person appointed to stay sober. So plan ahead, take the pass. But if you do drink and you're in a location where you're not home, call a friend, a sober friend, to give you a ride. Call a taxi, get a hotel room if you need to for the night, or stay where you are. And there's a group of volunteers called RUI, Rides Under Influence. And these folks are volunteers. You can call them. Their number is 210-999-0200. They work through TxDOT. These are volunteers that you call if you need a ride and you've been drinking. They'll go where you're at, take your car with you to your home at no cost. So it's a lot of good things that we're doing with a lot of help from the community. But this is a big month for us, and we want to eliminate those 8 fatalities to 0.
Absolutely. Well, Mario, thank you very much for being here and the great information you provided. And thank you for tuning in. I would like to once again thank my guests for taking the time to provide us with such helpful information about the continued growth of our city and the transportation plans being developed to address this growth. Please join us again for Lopez Live Community Empowerment. Until next time, I'm your City Councilman Ray Lopez, and thank you very much, San Antonio.
If you drive buzzed, it could cost you around $10,000. You'll face major legal fees, major fines, and steep insurance penalties. You could lose everything. Buzzed, busted, and broke. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Respondí a un choque en la carretera. Cuando llegué, miré una mujer en el lado del pasajero y parecía que estaba dormida. En realidad estaba muerta y no tenía cinturón de seguridad. Siento que es una lástima que una muchacha tan joven hubiera muerto. Eso me motiva de aplicar las leyes sobre el cinturón de seguridad. El cinturón de seguridad sí salva vidas. Ella no tuvo por qué haber muerto.